Rory is also, he just was kind enough to give me a bookmark of his new book that he's edited called Promoting Successful Integration. Tell us about the book real quick.
Oh, thank you. It's a book we put together actually for our Department of Defense to help our service members when they return to reintegrate into their communities successfully. So we talk about resilience, we talk about finances, importance of family supports, importance of community, and different resources that communities can offer to just give people the tools they need to become successful veterans in their communities.
So promoting successful integration for folks who want to go take a look at that. You are called, Rory, the gladiator of assistive technology. What does that mean to you?
I don't know, that's a moniker I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
I think what it means to me is that I've been in probably a 35-year fight now to create technologies to promote full integration of people with disabilities so that we can lead companies, we can be successful academics, healthcare providers, athletes, participate in any way that we can. My leaning is that I'm an engineer, and so my goal is towards technology. But at HURL, the Human Engineering Research Laboratories, we include engineers and therapists and counselors and physicians, political scientists and statisticians all working together. And I think also what makes us a bit unique is that most of us have some form of disability ourselves. And so we're not only professionals and family members, but we're also members of the community.
How would you rank Pittsburgh as an ecosystem for this? Because I know it's not just helping people in life, it's helping them in jobs and families and all dimensions of human being. And I'd just love to hear from you a no-nonsense grade on what communities, because this is a topic that you don't see happening all around the country, and I'd like to, but how would you grade this ecosystem here as receptivity, I guess, to the kinds of things you're promoting?
I actually think I sort of grade it in different aspects.
Right.
I think that from an innovation ecosystem and a diversity ecosystem, Pittsburgh's a great environment. Mm-hmm. You heard that all morning long, basically.
Right.
That very creative community, becoming a very diverse community, embracing diversity, I think, of all kinds, which includes people with disabilities. I mean, last night I was at an event. Today is Disability Mentoring Day, by the way, so it's kind of an opportunity to bring young people with disabilities into the workplace and introduce them to that opportunity. And we had Judy Heumann here, which Judy is one of the the founders of the disability rights movement, and she'd come to Pittsburgh because she's got a lot of friends here. A lot of us have been engaged in promoting rights for people with disabilities. We are a geographically and historically challenged city, which in a sense is a strength and a weakness simultaneously. I mean, we're geographically challenged because there's lots of hills, there's lots of old architecture here. And even, the building we're in today, I had to take an elevator lift. There's no zero-step entrance into this facility. And, but that allows us to be creative, right? When you face challenges are also opportunities, and so I think that's useful for us too.
This may sound too cosmic for this conversation today, but as I was reading about you and I'd love to hear the audience to hear some of the things that you've helped innovate and bring to market, because it's not just that you're inventing and bringing them, you're working with partners that are actually looking for things that they can take out and disperse in economy and sell. But it occurred to me that people in general, whether they have a disability or not, that the age of assisted, we're all going to be assisted by technologies. When I think about genetics and I think about robotics and I think about automated cars, that we're entering in an era where the synthesis of machines to help us move forward and kind of live that life, do you think that changes, does that help your task to become easier, that technology is pervading every element of everyone's life, disabled or not?
Yes and no. So, I mean, first, we're the only, we're America's largest minority group.
Right.
We represent about 50 million people, and we're
50 million people.
Yes.
Wow.
About 50 million people. And we're the only one you can join in an instant, right? A friend of mine once said, It's very easy to join, but it's very costly and painful. And so that makes it a little bit unique. I think the advances in technology have been tremendous for individuals with disabilities, but they present a risk as well. So you might remember the early analog cell phones were not compatible with hearing aids.
I didn't know that.
So they were, you know, this ubiquitous, wonderful technology. They were displacing landlines, but they were going to alienate individuals with hearing impairment.
Wow.
But then the smartphone came along. It's digital, it's compatible with hearing aids, and it texts, right? And most young people today don't answer their phone, right? They will rather text you, which makes that technology even more empowering for individuals with disabilities. I love the fact that companies like Toyota and Ford and Yamaha and others have now started to say, we don't really want to think about wheelchairs and cars and buses and planes. We want to think about mobility systems and transportation systems, like you were saying. So how do we, across your lifespan, how do we get you to be mobile? How do we get you around your house? How do we get you out of your house into your community? How do we get you out into the workplace, out of the cities and around the globe? And I think that's really awesome to see that now we're talking about it is a function of mobility, a function of being able to interact and communicate versus assistive technologies. So you see in your computer there's a lot of ways to adapt them to anybody. And as a matter of fact, they've got away from the term in many cases in operating systems about accessibility software because it's not necessarily about accessibility, it's about inclusion, and everybody can use those tools to make that software or hardware more powerful for them.
You know, I just looked through the list of things that you've developed, and I don't know what all these are: Smart Wheel, the Natural Fit Push Rim, the Path Lock, the Permanent Mobility and Manipulation Appliance. I mean, there's, you know, all sorts of adventures I haven't yet experienced in this. And I don't know if I'm saying this right, the Mobile Enhancement Robotic Wheelchair, is that a MeBot?
MeBot.
Yeah, MeBot. So you've done, I mean, is anybody else doing what you're doing?
Not to the scale. I think we've grown to be, you know, we're the largest and probably the most productive sort of rehabilitation engineering assistive technology lab in the world. We call ourselves Laboratories,
right?
Because of the fact that it's dynamic and interactive and changing. And rather than centers and institutes, I view it as being a little more stodgy. And so it's, in a sense, that's a good thing, a bad thing. We have had the good fortune of spinning off through our alumni and through our friends, smaller scale centers in Korea and China and Japan. We're working now in Brazil and Colombia. Because you know, we just don't have the capacity to solve or address all the barriers in the world.
So tell us about the Cybathlon.
So the Cybathlon is an interesting idea. It's actually a robotics competition to try to drive improvements in mobility for individuals with disabilities. So it's exoskeletons, prosthetic limbs, robotic powered wheelchairs.
I wish we had pictures of all of this over here, because I have pictures and it's really cool. I just want to tell you. So go look up some of this stuff. But
so
yeah.
It's kind of fun. It was actually, it's based on the National Veterans Wheelchair Games, which we hosted in Pittsburgh in 2011. They'll be in Louisville next year. There's a competition there called the Supergiant Slalom, which is basically all the world's worst obstacles put in line and to see if people can overcome them. And so with
technology assisted, right? Comment.
And the Cybathlon said, hey, let's expand that beyond wheelchairs to other technologies. And they create this competition. And so we participated in 2016. We actually were just in Germany for the Cybathlon experience, which is kind of a road show to promote what technology can do. We did well. We made it to the finals. We took a little bit different approach, which we hope other people will follow, because a lot of people sort of built devices for the competition. And really, my thought is, what you really want to do is develop devices to face real-world challenges and then test them in the competition.
Right.
Which was recognized, actually, by not only the the creators, and I'm one of the organizing committee members, but we won actually the best design robot with the Blackwood Design Award. So of all the robots that were there.
When I read about that Cybathlon, and the most human part of that for me, beyond those that were competing and doing these things, was the fact that the audience was huge and cheering, and I think you expressed to the journalists writing about this your own excitement about that, that this was, the stadium was full, and I guess the inverse to that is, I say, in places, we're talking about workplaces, we're talking about workplace diversity, we've talked about a lot of different dimensions, and I'm just interested in what you think we need to do to make the proverbial audience of the corporate workspace or workspaces out there, you know, more engaged with the work you're doing than we're doing today. So, you know, take a swipe at them. What isn't happening that should be happening? They're
not hiring enough of us. I mean, there's still 70% unemployment of individuals with disabilities like my own. Despite individuals might have engineering degrees or counseling degrees or healthcare degrees, I mean, we don't have enough role models in industry, academia, healthcare, government, and so that's the last frontier for us, right, is employment.
Do you think I mean, I hate to call it halls, I mean, sometimes when I think about storytelling and how to enhance it, sometimes halls of fame of great, you know, either best practices or someone who overcame, is that in your laundry list of things to consider as you push more normalization of the workplace?
You know, the fact is that it does, I think, help that employers, you know, it's one of those things that if you don't see individuals with disabilities, you don't see their capabilities. Things have gotten better, at least in education. We have more opportunities. You know, when I was first injured, it was perfectly legal to discriminate against me and say, you know, sorry, you can't go to college because, you know, you have a disability. And I could not fly. It was before the Air Carrier Transportation Act. Literally, I would try to go to a conference sometimes, and the airline would say, hey, I'm sorry, you have a disability, you can't fly. Or you could fly with an attendant. And of course, I'd have to ask some stranger to volunteer to be my attendant, and they would ask, what does that entail? I said, if the plane goes down, you know, would you help me get off the plane? And most people would say, well, anybody would do that. And I said, you know, by the way, I might have to help you get off the plane depending on how the crash goes, right?
Yeah.
So,
I want to go to the audience in just a moment, but I want to ask you a question of what the audience can do. There's a guy I'm very inspired by named Jim McKelvey. Jim co-founded with Jack Dorsey the firm Square. You may, you know, when you charge with your credit card on your iPhone on this, created this,
right.
And he was worried about St. Louis, and he was talking about both diversity in a very different way, but you know, people that had been, you know, had some jail time in their past, or had health issues, or may have been disabled in some way, and said he can take almost anyone and turn them into a world-class coder. And he also said in the St. Louis schools there were people that were graduating in coding that were not getting the value for the degrees that they were buying, that they were not being trained well enough. So he created a group called Launch Code, which was really a nonprofit way to give people another chance. And again, the same thing was, they weren't getting hired, but they were better coders than the people were getting hired. And he began using his semi-celebrity Jack Dorsey pal status to call CEOs and tell the CEOs their HR departments were completely miserable and were so risk averse they were leaving talent on the table. And then now the Launch Code story is radically different and opened this up. And I don't know if that's the right story, that, you know, shame and embarrassment and guilt is a good strategy, but what do you think? Just tell the audience right now, what are some of the things that would be useful to you beyond whether it's technology assistance or it's understanding of normalizing the workplace? What would be good things for our audience to do to become part of this story?
So one of them is that, you know, I'm a firm believer that if we are mainstreaming our kids with disabilities with other kids, right? So they get that experience. You went to school together, you got to know each other. We went, you know, offering internship opportunities where you bring in young people with and without disabilities together. So that they can see, so that hopefully when they go out and they make those employment decisions, they go, hey, I went to school with a kid, or I did this internship and we became friends. And it is about diversity, really, right? I mean, we need to understand that disability
exposure
is also
first.
Exposure is part of it, right? Opportunity, exposure, and then I think identifying, changing the culture of the workplace to be more inclusive and to be a safer workplace, like some of the earlier speakers talked, right?
Right.
Because there are actually a lot of people with disabilities in the workplace now. They just don't disclose, right? And so once they start disclosing, then it kind of opens the door for somebody like me where it's obvious, right? And so I think that's another thing too. We need actually people with disabilities. I will be honest, even for me, it's still tough in the workplace because you have to do your job, you have to try to advocate for yourself,
right.
and often you have to advocate for others. So whereas a person without a disability in the workplace or that doesn't come from an underrepresented group often has one job, do your job well, right? But I have 3 jobs. And
Does Pitt, I assume that's Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, do they advocate for you enough? I mean, and not you personally, but...
So that culture is changing. I think...
so the answer is not enough.
Yes, I would say not enough, but I think that we're on the right trajectory. I think Chancellor Gallagher and the team that he's put in place has embraced diversity. But you know, it takes time to change. It takes time to change culture, and you have to put processes in place. But the hardest part of changing culture is changing people, right? And people don't change. People don't change without being without exposure.
Right. Well, thank you for your candor. Let me open up questions and comments from the audience. Yes. Oh, over here. Oh, come on, guys. You know you have a question. Todd. Todd, by the way, was the first one through the door this morning, so he's a little bit of a hero for me.
I was curious, how much could mobility increase employment opportunities for people? I know you're talking about the mentorship model, but mobility seems to be a really tough situation because there's only one option, which is pretty much access, unless you have a adaptive vehicle that you own.
A little closer, Todd.
And you have a driver. So I'm just curious, like, what other mobility options could be out there that could help increase employment and kind of create this virtuous cycle where you're getting more exposure to people with disabilities? Because I actually work with somebody in city government who uses a wheelchair, and he's been with city government for 25 years. So it's kind of interesting to see how far he's come along, but it doesn't sound like, you know, that's the situation with most people with disabilities.
Well, it's great. I mean, mobility is key, right?
So let me just repeat it for folks. So the question was, what can be done with really the mobility backbone of a city to help enhance access and help? So go ahead.
Well, I mean, one, this is a great time to be in mobility because it is rapidly changing.
Right.
With, you know, Pittsburgh's the place, right? With smart cars, on-demand vehicles, you know, the future will be on-demand vehicle systems. I actually think that you'll actually be able to get some kind of mini car or some personal mobility device that will take you really from your house to another transportation hub. Hopefully that will be connected to airline transport. So that's key. If you can't get to where you need to go, then you can't get a job, you can't participate in society, and that's where mobility comes in. But I do think that even, you know, communicate, like, in fact, that any of you can call one of the on-demand systems like Uber or Lyft on your phone, that's a tremendous benefit to individuals with disabilities or older adults as well. I think by 2050, maybe 2060, I mean, we won't have cars, right? It'll just be, you'll buy a service and you'll use that, and we'll know when you put your 2-year-old in to go to daycare, right? And you don't have to take them there yourself. That you can trust it. And I think that opens a tremendous opportunity for individuals with disabilities to fully participate. So that's one of our big barriers. Can you get, and cities can work on this, you know, accessible buses, connecting, furthering on-demand systems, and then, of course, making their buildings accessible as well, curb cuts, zero entry buildings, things like that.
Any other questions, comments? In the back. Well, then I'm going to go off with mine. I'm going to share with the audience this astounding thing. You were a 1988 Seoul Paralympics bronze medal winner, so that's a super cool thing, yeah. He came in fourth in some other things, but I'm not going to mention those. Just gonna, you know, but I am, you know, you have this thing in here, and I'm very concerned about our veterans. You were a veteran. You have this great line. It said that you were a sergeant in the Army, and that you lived the lessons you learned as a sergeant in everyday life, and you continue to apply them. And I am, you know, concerned that how we incorporate, that's another kind of diversity, is reaching out to people who've gone through war, who've had conflict, who've had this. It's not really on our agenda today, but I want to add it, is what do you think we can do on that dimension of inclusivity and looking, because I actually don't think it's as easy. I mean, I think every dimension of what we talked about today, gravity isn't taking us there. You actually need smart, thoughtful ways to get the equation right and to get a healthier workplace, a healthier community. What do you think we're not doing on the veterans front?
Well, first, we don't know veterans, right? There's only about 1 million people serving total, so it's, it's less than 1% of the, about 0.6% of the population. Only about 6% of the living population in the United States has ever served. So there's a further and further disconnect. And if you look at unfortunately, the military has become a family business as well, which makes it even further disconnected from our communities. So what we need to do is, our human resources departments need to have individuals that can look at the resumes or the applications from our veteran population and interpret those to place them in the right jobs. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, as a 20-year-old sergeant, right? I was responsible for people. I had, you know, I controlled a budget almost as large as I do now at my age. And a good friend of mine once said this. Fred Downs, he was wounded in Vietnam, amputee. And he went on to later on be the Assistant Secretary of VA for prosthetics. Prosthetics in the VA is all medical devices. And they were giving him a hard time about what he was spending on prosthetic limbs and prosthetic wheelchairs, and whether it was a good use of the government's fund to allow a purchasing agent to spend $100,000 without going through an extended contracting process. Because that's what some prosthetic limbs cost, and some wheelchairs cost $30,000. And Fred had a really good answer. He said, you know, when I was a lieutenant in Vietnam, I could order a $10 million rocket strike on a phone and nobody said a word, right? And then now as a veteran, if I want to get a new prosthetic arm, right, it's a year-long struggle. And we need to, you know, to think about that differently. That's a level of trust that we place in our military veterans. We just don't know how to translate that into the civilian sector. I also don't, and I think in this current generation, we miss the fact that it's an all-volunteer force. And a lot of these individuals join out of a sense of selfless service, and that they actually want to give back to their communities, and they can be tremendous individuals. And they've created great organizations like Mission Continues and Team Red, White, and Blue, and No One Left Behind, and Team Rubicon, which are all based on giving back to the communities and making a tremendous difference. And I think they would do the same thing. They also understand teamwork, and they're much more into we than me or I. And that's you know, who else better to help build your team. So I think the idea is set up somebody in your HR department that can look at those responsibilities, recognize that our American military is America's greatest leadership academy, and take advantage of building on those experiences to create great opportunities.
Well, thank you. Well, the name of your book, Promoting Successful Integration, could very well have easily been this name of this conference. So thank you so much, Rory Cooper, University of Pittsburgh. Thanks for your insights and everything you're doing. Thank you so much.